Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our South by Southwest virtual session on ways educators can support undocumented students in our K-12 schools. Before we get started, I'll be remiss if I do not acknowledge the current state of our world as we all confront this health pandemic. Specifically, I'd like to acknowledge the detrimental and disproportionate impact that it has had in our communities of color, our immigrant and indigenous communities. One thing, however, has been true, and that is the bravery of all educators and teachers who are creating, in the midst of so much change and uncertainty, a place where our students can continue to feel supported and cared for. Thank you for leading with courage and for being there for all of our students. As we get started, this session has been designed and will be led by our team at ImmSchools. We are an immigrant-led nonprofit organization that partners with educators to transform our schools into safe, welcoming, and inclusive learning spaces for our undocumented and mixed status students. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this session. My name is Viridiana Carrizales. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of ImmSchools. As a former undocumented student, my work here is centered in my experience and that of my parents as we navigated K-12 and later higher ed without having an immigration status in this country. It is because of their bravery and resilience that I stand with all of you here today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vanessa Luna. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm one of the co-founders of ImmSchools and lead our programs as a chief program officer. I currently reside in Brooklyn, New York. I've been in this country for about 19 years and grew up undocumented in New York and was a former DACA-mentored teacher in both Los Angeles and New York City. I've witnessed firsthand both the power of our undocumented community and of our educators to support our students and families in our schools. And I am deeply, deeply committed to our work in immigration and education. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lorena Romain. My pronouns are she, hers, hers. I'm also one of the co-founders and chief strategy officers at ImmSchools. And like my colleagues here, I grew up undocumented, and a lot of this work is led by the resilience of my community, my family, and now as a parent, I feel a deep sense of obligation to ensure that educators are able to provide support to my kids and all the kids out there who have an immigrant background. Before we get started, we want to ground ourselves on some objectives that we hope you take away through this presentation. The first one is educators will understand the federal and state policies pertaining to undocumented students. The second one, that educators will understand the experience and challenges of K-12 undocumented students. And lastly, educators will gain a set of effective practices and skills that would allow them to create a safe and welcoming classroom culture. In addition to those things, I just want to remind everybody that we have slightly adjusted this presentation to add COVID-19 related practices and information for undocumented families and students you may serve. At ImmSchools, we believe that in order for an equitable education system to exist, it must support the unique needs of undocumented students and families we serve. And with that, we want to really emphasize this idea that no human is illegal. An action can be illegal, but not an individual. And with that, I will transition to discuss a little bit of the context and the definitions we will be using throughout our conversation. So what we mean when we say undocumented, there are different types of immigration status, and for the purpose of this conversation, when we say undocumented, we're going to refer to these different individual groups. One is folks that enter the country with legal status and overstay for whatever reason. So that might be someone that came here with a work permit and for whatever reason just overstayed. The second type of group of individuals that are also undocumented are folks that enter without inspection. So for example, I came here without inspection, I crossed the Arizona distance by 9 hours, and I would be under this category. The third group of individuals is folks that have deferred action for childhood arrival, also known as DACA. And these are folks that are undocumented and have a 2-year work permit that can be renewed. And the last type of folks that also are undocumented are temporary protective status individuals. And these are the 4 types of groups of individuals that could consider themselves undocumented. And so we encourage all of you, as you are engaging in this conversation and viewing in your home, to consider these questions, and we're extending that invitation. So to think through all these different things, you can put pause in this video as well if you need time to write it down, or whatever is your preference to process this information. The first question we want you to consider is, what has been the impact of immigration in your school community? And that can look very different for all of you. So we encourage you to think about that as we're going along. The second question is, what are some questions you have around supporting undocumented community as an educator? And so in order for us to get to some of these questions, we really want to establish a common understanding of who are we talking about. And with that, we're going to start with some of the demographics and some information of who they are and what's the population like. The first one is that 3.9 million undocumented students might have a parent that is undocumented in the K-12 or themselves are undocumented. The second number I want you to remember as we go along is 98,000 undocumented students who graduate high school each year, and yet only 13,000 enroll in higher education. And that is due, unfortunately, to some of the in-state tuition laws that vary by state. In addition to this, another group of folks that I want you to keep in mind as we're going along is over 14,000 individuals are documented teachers and educators who work in our K-12 schools, impacting over 325,000 students and parents each year. One thing I want you to highlight as we're going in this conversation is the complexity of our immigration status, right? And this graphic illustrates a little bit of the complexity right there is in the back of the line. It's really difficult to navigate this broken immigration system. So as you're engaging with parents, really understand there is no right way, there is in the back of the line, and our complex system of how to adjust your status is the one that might not exist for a lot of folks when you think about the over 11 million undocumented individuals who live in this country. When we think about the demographics, I want to share a little bit of demographics on the amazing, beautiful diversity of our community. So when we think about the fastest growing population, we're really looking at our Asian Pacific Islander population. So our fastest population you will see on one of the charts is from India, China, Philippines, South Korea, Vietnam, Pakistan, and other Asian countries. And this particular group of folks are the fastest growing undocumented population in America. Another group of folks that I really want you to think about that we're often left out of the stories we are hearing or the media that are often not shed light to is our undocumented immigrant. And so when you think about the folks that are fastest deportable group of individuals in our country are unfortunately our undocumented Black, and they consist of over 500,000 individuals in our country. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to my colleague, Vanessa Luna.
Thank you so much, Lorena, for providing that context for us. We are going to be digging into some key legislation and policy to help us understand how we as educators can support our undocumented students and families. So as we go through this section, similarly to what Lorena had invited you to do, I invite you to take a pause and reflect on these questions. What policy is new to you? What policy impacts your specific role in your schools? So feel free to pause this video right now and reflect or think about these questions as we begin. The first policy that we want to highlight is Plyler v. Doe. Plyler v. Doe is a 1982 Supreme Court case that states that every child, regardless of immigration status, has a right to receive a K-12 education. It is critical and important that schools understand that they cannot require proof of citizenship when enrolling students in K-12 schools or inquire about a student's immigration status. Another key policy and a legal authority when it comes down to K-12 schools is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which is FERPA. FERPA is a federal law that protects the privacy of students' educational records. The law applies to all schools that receive funds under the applicable programs of the U.S. Department of Education. Therefore, it is critical that you know that students, regardless of their immigration status, cannot be shared, their information cannot be shared because of FERPA. In addition to FERPA, another key policy that you must know about that protects and supports our undocumented students and their families is the Department of Homeland Security, or ICE, Sensitive Locations Memo. What this memo means is that ICE is not to enforce in sensitive locations. So they are not to make arrests or detain folks in sensitive locations. These sensitive locations include schools, including preschools, primary schools, secondary schools, post-secondary schools, in colleges and universities, as well as other institutions of learning, such as vocational or trade schools. This is the schools piece, but in addition to this, you also have hospitals, churches, synagogues, mosques, the sites of funerals, weddings, or other public religious ceremonies, and a site during the occurrence of a public demonstration or a march or a rally. These are protections we must know as educators, and we must also actively share with our students and families. So as I mentioned, Immigration Custom Enforcement, or ICE, is not to visit your schools under safe and sensitive locations memo. And so, however, there might be instances where ICE may attempt to visit your school or gain access to school records. That is why it's incredibly important for school leaders and front office staff to be aware of the differences between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. The administrative warrant does not allow ICE entry. It is signed by an ICE supervisor and not by a judge. It may also have a U.S. Department of Homeland Security title at the top right-hand side. That is an administrative warrant, does not allow ICE entry. Now, a judicial warrant does allow ICE entry, particularly to homes. And it is signed by a judge, and it often will have the name of the federal court at the top, such as the Supreme Court of the State of New York. It is important for you to provide training and understanding to front office staff and administrators around the differences between these two key warrants in order for you and for families to feel safe and protected. So what can you do as a district in particularly when it comes to school policies? This key policy, which is a safe zone resolutions, a resolution passed at a school district level that essentially contain reassurances of immigrant students and families and procedures for responding to law enforcement and sharing student information, as well as having clear supports for not only families, but also for our staff. So what that may mean is that there's a resolution and a clear statement of support, but also a clear implementation plan, such as training for teachers, such as Know Your Rights workshops. Now, these types of policies send a clear message of support, but must also be backed by concrete implementation, which our best practices will dig into. If you want to learn more, I highly recommend visiting NEA, as they have concrete examples of resolutions that school districts can implement as a first great step in policy to ensure safety and protection for undocumented and mixed status families. We could not have this conversation today if we did not mention the power of our undocumented community to seek higher education. Undocumented students can access college. They can go to college. It is important, it is an important statement for you to know and to actively share with our educators, not just in a high school setting, but throughout K-12. Now, it is difficult, but it is possible. For me, I went to a public university in upstate New York called Binghamton. I was undocumented, This was before DACA came out, and I was able to access it in 2012. And college had always been what I aspired to access. However, it was incredibly difficult as a high school student who had very limited support from educators, as they did not know what to do with me and how to support me. My parents' combined income was $20,000 in New York, yet schools, the price were incredibly high and something that we could not afford. I had no one to turn to often in my school setting and did not feel safe or supported by my counselor. So it was literally through community support that I went to college. My mom took on 2 extra jobs. My dad took on another job. My family from Peru sent us money. My cousin who worked caddying at a golf course in Westchester County gave us money. And lastly, one of the houses, one of the ladies my mom cleans houses for, gave us a private loan of $10,000. While many of you might say, wow, this is an unbelievable story, Vanessa, that's incredible. A lot of it was because of luck. It was not because of what I deserved, nor what our undocumented students and families deserve. And so I tell you this because I experienced a lot of mental health challenges during my journey of accessing college. And I needed a lot of support. And so your role as educators, especially in this national conversation, is to do a little bit of homework and to do a little bit of research and be that support system for your student. Here, you will see that there's different policies in regards to specific states and specific areas of the country in regards to in-state financial aid and in-state support. You will always be able to access private funding and private support as an undocumented student. And so the largest challenge is not our abilities. The largest challenge is how am I going to pay for this? Therefore, accessing financial support through in-state financial aid, private scholarships, private schools, and other institutions is the way to go. Once again, your role here is to be supportive, to do a little bit of research around your state policies, and actively inform students, very, very young, that regardless of their immigration status, they can go to college. It will be unyielding to not share how COVID has impacted our students and families during these times. We have selected 3 main pieces of policy to speak about, which will directly informed by our students and families and what they have been asking us during this time. First of all, we want to acknowledge the anti-immigrant context that we are living in addition to the pandemic, which has exacerbated inequities that our students and families are facing. There is clear fears over public disclosure of immigration status and what it could do to students and families in regards to accessing healthcare and all different types of resources at this time. And so the 3 main policies that you should understand and know is 1, testing and treatment for COVID, also called the coronavirus, will not be used against immigrants during a public charge test. I will not dig it too deep into public charge. Essentially, what you should know and inform families is that regardless of their immigration status, if they seek to one day adjust their status, if they're even able to, then this particular treatment for COVID will not go against them. And so that fear around benefits may be something that you've seen in your community. It is important that we inform that to families. We should also inform to families that the Department of Homeland Security has the sensitive locations memo, which I mentioned, and that includes hospitals. And therefore, they should not be fearful that Immigration Custom Enforcement will conduct arrest or other enforcement actions in healthcare facilities, such as hospitals, doctors' offices, or clinics. The last policy that you should understand is the federal stimulus support. As it is currently written, which is today in May, as it is currently written, it does not include undocumented and mixed status families, as you need a valid social security number in order to get financial support. This means that a lot of our families in this moment are relying on organizations like ImmSchools or local organizations and support to get financial assistance, as the federal government has once again turned their backs on our immigrant community, some of who are frontline workers and doing everything in their power to support this country. These policies have deep impacts on the well-being and access to equitable education for our students and families. As I have mentioned, our undocumented and mixed status families have never had the option to leave their immigration status outside of your school or outside of your classroom, and neither do they at this moment in time. Therefore, it is imperative that as educators, we understand the intersection of education and immigration in K-12 schools as it impacts all of our students and families. As we begin this section, we invite you to reflect on the following questions. How do the experiences of undocumented students impact their access to an equitable education? If you'd like to, please pause and reflect, whether it's by writing or by thinking, or by sharing with a person who may be next to you if you're not alone at home. If so, I will continue. There are clear ways in which undocumented families are impacted by immigration in our schools. The Civil Rights Project at UCLA has found that the following findings that depict the immigration impact of our entire school community. Immigration enforcement and immigration policy doesn't just impact one or two students. And the idea of us asking how many undocumented students are impacted or how many families are going to be impacted is a false narrative. It truly impacts everyone in the entire community. This study focused on 730 schools across 24 districts in 12 states. And I'm going to highlight two findings, but you will see four in this slide. The first one is that 90% of administrators reported observing emotional and behavioral problems among immigrant students. That is a massive amount of impact in regards to the trauma that students are facing in our classrooms and in our schools. That, as I believe, has only been exacerbated and increased by COVID. Now, 2/3 have reported the fear and concern for classmates was affecting the education of not only students that were impacted in targets of enforcement, but also just students as a whole and a classroom as a whole. This is clearly felt in our schools and in our classroom. The picture on the left depicts an elementary school student in Austin after a series of immigration arrests. The quote on the right is of one of my beautiful former students that I taught in Los Angeles. I will read this quote to you, clearly remembering the day that he shared this with me. How do you feel when people mention getting deported? He said, it makes me feel scared because people just have to leave. Like Perla, one of my former students. When her dad got deported and she had to move back to Mexico because she was a good friend, and like people get deported, even though they're hard workers. Same with my dad's friends. Like when it comes up, you see it on the news all the time. The other night, I had 2 dreams of my parents. They came and got them. I asked who came and got them. Like in the back of the things, it says ICE. My other dream was that they went back to Mexico, and like me and my sisters had to stay. I got scared and woke up crying because I didn't want to stay alone. I want to name that this right-hand quote occurred before the current administration, because individuals were still getting detained and deported back in 2015 and in 2016 when I was in the classroom. These two experiences depict the trauma that many undocumented students face and how critical it is for schools to be safe and welcoming spaces for all, now more than ever. COVID has exacerbated these inequities and in an unjust system that our families were already living in. Oftentimes, they have been the hardest hit by COVID. It has been our immigrant and undocumented families. So I'm going to give you a minute to read this on your own, and then I will summarize. So please pause this video and take a second to read the words of our students and families that have come directly from them, and read about their experiences. Hopefully you were able to pause. I'm going to summarize. What we see first and foremost is strength, power, and resilience in the face of systemic inequities. From being not eligible to aid and asking why, to having to have multiple responsibilities in addition to virtual learning, to feeling a deep sense of fear in accessing basic human rights and resources. It is undeniable that our undocumented students and their families must be supported and protected now more than ever. And I will say that it is really important, mindset-wise, for us to first acknowledge their strength and their power before we begin to support them. There are tools and concrete practices educators can adopt. And I have the honor to pass it over to my colleague, Vidi, who's gonna dig deep into these best practices.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. We're gonna move on to best practices. We will be reviewing these 4 best practices that you can implement in your classroom, in your school community, or through virtual learning. We're gonna go by one by one, providing very concrete examples. To deepen our understanding of the reality of our students and best guide you through these best practices, we'd like to share this scenario with you. After I read it, you can pause this video and take a few minutes to reflect, write notes, and really think about what is happening in this scenario. As we go through the best practices, we'd like for you to keep this scenario in mind. And it says, one of your students has only completed a few of the Google Classroom's assignments. When you ask the student what is causing the delay, she explains that she has been helping her parents with the bills and trying to help with translation. Her parents, who you know are immigrants from Haiti, have been fired from their jobs as a restaurant cook and housekeeper. She tells you that they cannot access any government help because they do not have Social Security numbers. She's really stressed because she doesn't know how they are going to eat, pay rent, or the bills. Again, you can take a couple of seconds, reflect on the scenario, and keep it in mind as we go through the best practices. So let's get started for the first best practice, and this is to recognize the resilience and power of our undocumented students and their families. It's important for us to recognize that our immigrant community is filled with resiliency and power. Our undocumented families have endured so much in this country that often dehumanizes and criminalizes their existence, yet they continue to seek resources and support despite systemic white failures. Their bravery and strength must always be recognized and admired, especially as schools and educators create safe and inclusive practices to support them. The article, for example, depicts our undocumented community in the front lines of this pandemic, and we must ensure that we're doing everything in our power to support them and to validate them. Language can be a powerful tool that we can use to acknowledge the power of our students. For example, if a student shares with you their experience that they're undocumented or their families are undocumented, thank them. Thank them for trusting you and acknowledge their bravery and their strength. Remind them that being immigrant is a beautiful thing. And I want you to ask yourself as an educator, when was the last time you highlighted your students' resiliency through your lessons or the conversations that you're having with them and their families? The second best practice is to cultivate a sense of belonging and well-being. Undocumented families are experiencing unique challenges, especially right now, that deeply impact their ability to seek resources and supports. Therefore, as educators, we must understand and adopt trauma-informed practices when engaging with students and families, including through a virtual learning space. Some of the practices that I want you to keep in mind is that relationships and well-being must take priority over assignments and behavioral compliance. We must address and discuss the rise of hate crimes against our Asian American community and develop a sense of safety through touch points with our students and their families. We must also actively listen to the needs of our students and their families before jumping into any solutions or taking action. And because detention and the deportation of family members is a reality that many of our students experience in our schools, especially right now, immigration officials are not stopping and they are terrorizing our undocumented community by conducting raids in the midst of this pandemic. So it's very important for us to recognize that the fear that our students are feeling is real, and for them to know that this is not normal. Our students should not be feeling this type of fear. this type of fear of being separated from their families, and we should acknowledge that. Here are also some other ways that you can create a sense of belonging, especially through virtual learning. There are quick mindful and soothing exercises that you can do with your students. For example, asking them to go outside and smell a flower, or completing the 4 corners breathing exercise prior to doing any type of lesson. There are also books like Breathe Like a Bear for younger grade levels and others that provide meditation practices for students. You can also start each lesson or virtual engagement by sharing at least one positive affirmation or strength with your students. And finally, you can adopt activities that elevates the diversity of our undocumented community. For example, the book that you see here, The Sun is Also a Star, highlights the story of an undocumented Jamaican girl and a South Korean boy who fall in love while one of their families faces deportation. Lastly, with this best practice, and this may be something that you can do once school resumes, whenever that is, or whenever you have access to your classroom, these are safe space visuals or posters that you can put in your classroom, in your school community, in the front office, that signals to students that you are an ally and you're a support system for them. This can be a very powerful way to let them know that their stories matter, that they matter, and that your classroom is a safe and welcoming space for everyone. As an undocumented student in K-12, I never shared my status with any of my teachers because I didn't know who I could trust. And now looking back, if I had seen a poster like this, it would have probably made me feel more comfortable to approach my teachers or anyone in my school and let them know that I needed help or that I had questions. So something as simple as this can truly have an impact in our students and their families. For best practice number 3 is to really actively inform all of our students and families of resources and opportunities. I often get this question from educators because we don't know the status of our families. How can we create or how can we share resources with them? And the answer to this is that you have to create resources or you have to share resources with all of your students. Don't wait for a student or a family to share with you that they're undocumented for you to share a resource. We must proactively be sharing resources with all of our students or creating resource corners in your classrooms. Or finding opportunities for us to share this information with everyone without waiting for them to come to us first. As educators, we know that family engagement is key to success of our students. Often due to language barriers, cultural differences, or systemic barriers, parents are left out of the conversation. We must create frequent and flexible opportunities for parents to engage with us. And create, for example, you can create a WhatsApp group or you can download apps like Talking Points to make sure that you're engaging families, especially in a language that they understand. And ask them questions, make them participants of their kids' education. Make sure that their input is considered as you develop your classroom vision and goals. Some examples of how districts and schools and educators have engaged students and families have been through Dream Summits or tabling events. Dream Summits are opportunities for immigrant students to receive information about applying for college, enrolling, navigating higher ed, especially as an immigrant and undocumented student. Also, if there's opportunities for you to do a school event, this can be a great time for you to share resources with families. Maybe you can set up a table and make sure that every family who comes into the school event is receiving a Know Your Rights card and leaving with information that they can take with them. This is something that you can do to make sure that every family is receiving the information that they need without having to expose their status to you or to others in the school. And then lastly, and please bookmark this page, is IMMI.org. This is a great resource where you can find information and resources about organizations that provide legal services for our students and their families. You can type in your zip code or your school address and it will show you all the different organizations that are within that area. All of these organizations that are listed have been vetted and are trusting sources that you can share with our families and with our students. For our last best practice, we'll highlight the importance of adopting and implementing pro-immigrant policies in school and district-wide. The first step for all schools, charter schools, districts, is to adopt and implement a safe zone resolution and policy that states that your school is a safe and welcoming space for all students, no matter their immigration status. As Vanessa mentioned earlier, this is the law, so you are emphasizing what the law already requires for every school. Secondly, you must have a protocol that details the steps that you, your staff, and everyone in your school will implement if an immigration agent comes into your school asking for a student's information. And while there's a memo, as Vanessa mentioned, that discourages officials from coming into our schools, we have seen several instances where immigrations have unfortunately come to schools asking for specific students' information. So this policy has to be adopted and implemented in every school, every charter, and every school district to protect the rights of our students. Our school must also offer counseling and mental health resources for all of our students. Unfortunately, when a family experiences the detention or deportation of a family member, everyone is impacted, especially our students. So how can we make sure that our students have the support that they need to process, especially this type of traumatizing experiences? We know that our students cannot learn unless they feel safe and unless their basic needs are met. And then lastly, many schools across the country have created immigration response networks, a group of educators, administrators, or community members who activate when a student is being impacted by the detention or deportation of a parent. This immigration response network can ensure that our students are safe, have access to food and shelter, that they're connecting the family to immigration legal services, and ensure that their school is providing the support that their students and families need. So it is critically important that all of our schools have these type of immigration response networks to provide that type of support for our students who are experiencing the deportation or detention of a parent. One example that I would like to highlight is the San Antonio Independent School District that is located here in San Antonio. Over the last 4 years, the district has passed a safe zone resolution and developed a police and community handbook to make sure that the rights of our students, especially our undocumented students, are protected. They have held Know Your Rights workshops at their schools for students and parents. They are requiring that educators attend a training on ways they can support immigrant and undocumented students. And they have hosted 3 Dream Summits with more than 300 students in attendance. This work is possible, and it must happen now. So now that you have reviewed these best practices, we'll put what we've learned into action by revisiting this scenario that we shared or that I shared earlier. As I read it again, I want you to think about these 2 questions. What type of support will you provide to this student? What proactive actions will you take as a result of this? One of your students has only completed a few of the Google Classroom assignments. When you ask the student what is causing the delay, she explains that she has been helping her parents with bills and trying to help with translation. Her parents, who you know are immigrants from Haiti, have been fired from their jobs as restaurant cook and housekeeper. She tells you that they cannot access any government help because they do not have a social security number. She's really stressed because she doesn't know how they're going to eat, pay rent, or their bills. Again, you can pause this video and take the next 3 to 5 minutes to reflect and note your responses to these 2 questions. Okay, welcome back. We are now going to revisit the scenarios and the best practices. One of the first things that I read here was the student explaining that she has been helping her parents with bills and trying to help with translation. And really this whole this whole story, this whole scenario. It's a very difficult scenario to read and to hear from a student. So the first thing that I will do will be to thank the student for being vulnerable and sharing something so personal with you. The second thing will be to recognize their leadership or her leadership and praise her for being bilingual or multilingual. What are her strengths, right? She's telling you that she's helping her parents with translation. So even in the midst of this very difficult situation, she is showing her leadership and the strengths that she has as a bilingual student. And then acknowledging that this additional responsibilities and stress are not normal. She should not be worrying about her family having enough to eat or paying bills or paying their rent. So acknowledging that stress is not normal is extremely important. The second thing I want to highlight here is that her parents, who you know are immigrants from Haiti, have been fired from their jobs. So one of the things that you can do in terms of best practice is make sure that you're directly connecting students to local organizations that can provide support regardless of immigration status. Make sure that before you're sharing information about food pantries, that you do your homework to ensure that those services are being provided regardless of immigration status of those who are seeking those resources. And then making sure that every resource you share are in the language that the parent understands. So in this particular scenario, that will be in Haitian Creole. And lastly, I read this last part in the scenario that says she's really stressed because she doesn't know how they're going to eat, pay rent, or bills. So this is, again, one of the things to, in terms of the best practices, a great opportunity to incorporate. And this is something that you should not do just when a student is approaching you with this type of difficult situations, but ongoing, incorporating mindfulness or self-soothing exercises in your classroom to help students deal with this type of stress. And then to do your part and advocate to make sure that your district and that your school has the policies in place to make sure that our students have access to the resources that they need. Do they have a mental health counselor that your school is providing? And making sure that we are not creating systems where our families have to show their IDs in order to access any type of benefit from us. And lastly, it's very important that you establish partnerships with local organizations that are providing this type of support for our families at this time. And with that, I will pass it to you, Vanessa.
Great. Thank you so much, Vidi, for walking us through some of these best practices that I want to name have been informed and developed by our immigrant-led team and a group of documented educators who've been in the classroom and have had this lived experience. At the end of all of our sessions, we usually close out with a commitment, right? Oftentimes when I was in the classroom, I felt like there was nothing I could do. And I can't imagine being in the classroom in this moment when there's so much pressure being put on you to be able to support our community. And so even though we're not in person, we're gonna encourage you to take some time to reflect and to commit to a best practice that you can adopt this or next school year to support your students and families. So take maybe a minute or two, pause this video, and think about what is one commitment that you can take with you. Awesome. Well, thank you for engaging with us in that. I'm really here to close us out and to remind us of our continued connection. Our liberation is deeply, deeply tied together. And so, as Assata Shakur has said, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. The issues of immigration and education are not just for those that are directly impacted by it. As educators, you have so much power. And while it might not feel like it right now in this moment, the role that you play with our students deeply, deeply is tied to our equal liberation and to our power and to accessing the supports that we all deserve regardless of our immigration status. And so with that, I just want to remind us of that, close us out, urge you to contact our team. All of our contact information you will find on the right-hand side. So please feel free to send us each an email. Visit our website to gain access to more resources. Also, if you are in Texas or in New York, please feel free to reach out to us to possibly partner for a professional development session or workshop. for educators, parents, or students. And also over social media, we are trying our best to make sure that we're providing resources and supports. So follow at ImmSchools and share our work on social media for tips, events, and best practices. Until we can see each other again, I speak for all of us and our team, but also all of our community, all of our students, all of our families. We are just incredibly grateful that you have chosen to spend your time with us. We are grateful for your work, and we know that this is possible because of you. And so with that being said, I want to just close it out. Thank you all so much. And I hope you stay safe and well during this very uncertain time. Moments like this make me incredibly hopeful. Thank you.